Welcome to the Human Frequency. Ken Rolla is joining us today to talk to us about his recent visit to the Bosnian pyramids, dealing with Hurricane Irma, how hurricanes are engineered, and what we can do about it. Ken's been a guest on our show many times, and he is an electrical engineer and scalar energy expert, and he offers detox solutions and orgone energy tools on his website, freshandalive.com. We're so happy, Ken, that you could join us today. Welcome back to the Human Frequency.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You guys are some of my favorite people in the world, so it's always fun to talk with you.
That's an honor. Thank you, Ken, because you're one of our favorite people in the world, and you've been an inspiration to us all these years working with orgone energy. In fact, I have to attribute the end of the drought to what you taught us about orgone energy.
Oh, great.
Yep, between you
Awesome.
and I think you've probably heard of DeWin Gardner, who is known as Orgonite
Oh,
Austin.
yeah.
I took
Yeah.
what you taught us, what he taught us, and Gabe and I started making orgonite, and that was the beginning of the end of the engineered drought.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome.
Actually, around the last time
Awesome.
you were on the show is about the time that we did our trip up to the Northwest and took care of the frequency fence up there. And at that point, it was just a matter of time before all the big rains came one after another, and then they officially ended it on I think it was April 7th of this year.
Well, speaking of big rains, Ken is in Florida, and Ken, you've been dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. How's the cleanup going?
Well, the cleanup wasn't bad with, where I'm at. I'm on the East Coast, the northeast coast of Florida, and the hurricane, they're always wrong when they predict where it's going to go, of course. And they were predicting that it was going to go right up the middle of Florida. And I think initially they were predicting it might go east of Florida. And it wound up going up the west coast of Florida, hit Naples directly, and then went up the west coast of Florida. And interestingly enough, I developed, we can talk about this in more detail, but I developed a technology for clearing chemtrails and nuclear fallout, and it actually clears all pollution out of the atmosphere and sends it out into space. And so when you do that, it balances the charge in the atmosphere. So when hurricanes, I've discovered, when hurricanes or tropical storms or any kind of severe weather comes through, it'll either just fall apart and be neutralized, or it'll bounce off and go out to sea. So I wasn't terribly concerned about the hurricane because last year we had Hurricane Matthew come through in October of 2016. And it was predicted to go right up the I-95 corridor on the East Coast and do a lot of damage. It was a Category 5 hurricane. And it wound up staying offshore about 75 miles off the coast, which is exactly the distance that my devices along the East Coast are protecting Florida. So it stayed off the coast. And interestingly enough, Dr. Joe Mercola, who a lot of folks probably heard of from Mercola.com, he lives about a half hour north of me, and he has one of my devices, and he was watching live radar as the storm was coming through, and he called me a few days after the hurricane, and he was all excited, and he said, your device saved my house.
It's amazing.
And he showed me, there was a radius of about 6 miles around his house that didn't get much damage, whereas outside of that band, the roads were washed away at the beach and all kinds of damage and stuff. And even that was much, much less than what it would have been had, he'd not had that device. So he got all excited and he wanted to develop it. But I bowed down because this kind of stuff. I've had death threats over this technology, and I've had, back in the 90s, I worked with free energy, and I had friends murdered, and so I understand the stakes with doing this kind of thing.
It is very risky to put out that kind of information and technology.
But at the same time,
it can be.
At the same time, Ken, you do live in a hurricane-prone region of the country, so you do have to be ready for when these things come in September and October.
Precisely. Yeah, and that brings a good point, Gabe. There was a wonderful channeling that Abraham Hicks did about hurricanes, particularly Florida hurricanes, because one of the interesting things I saw when the hurricane comes, you're exactly right. If you're living in a place like California and you've got earthquakes, then you don't build a house like you do on the East Coast. If you're living in Florida with hurricanes, you don't, you take measures to protect yourself as best you can from a hurricane. And generally, people that have not been through hurricanes, it's not like getting hit by a tornado. A tornado can just blow your house to smithereens. But a hurricane, generally, it's usually not the winds that do the most damage, it's the flooding. And so, I live 3 miles in from the coast, and our house is elevated. And, it's pretty well built and all that. And we have a generator, and we have, we've battened down our hatches so that, when these winds come through, I mean, we've been through 120, 130 mile an hour winds, no problem.
Wow.
Get a lot of yard debris.
Yeah.
And so last October, we hadn't had a hurricane in about 12 years. And I know it's because there are people, myself and others, who have put orgone devices and other things around Florida to help protect it. So, you can actually go online and Google Florida hurricane drought, and you can read all about, I think it was like 14 years we didn't have a hurricane. And so, anyway, because we hadn't had one in so long, last year, when Hurricane Matthew came through, there was a lot of debris that came down, a lot of dead branches and stuff like that. And it took 2 months to clean up from that, because I'm on 5 acres, so I've got a lot of property to clean. And in general, there was a lot more damage to the trees and things because they hadn't had a hurricane in a long time. This year, between the hurricane weakening and staying to the west, and last year's, Matthew, most folks on the East Coast didn't get that much damage. Particularly like Miami. I had a friend who lives in Miami who said that they really didn't get much of anything, except a little bit of flooding maybe. But the fear that what was really interesting to me was the fearful reaction of people who didn't even live in Florida. Like on Facebook, people are like, "Oh, been nice to know you, Ken," and you're toast.
No, I knew you'd be fine. I knew you'd be fine.
Exactly. Well, the thing I've learned in my life of 56 years now is that I've been through tornadoes, hurricanes, fires, floods, and I've always been fine. And it's because I believe that, I create my reality and I create a safe one. So I'm not in the wrong place at the wrong time. But also, practically speaking, I'm not stupid. If I know I'm living in Florida and hurricanes are coming through, even if it's only every 10 years, I'm going to do what I can to protect myself. I've got a generator, I've got my house, things are screwed down, and, like our roof, for example, when we first moved here, we had an old roof and it got shingles blown off and stuff in the first hurricane. So we got a good roof and, no longer have that problem. But it's people who are living in victimhood and fear and don't take responsibility for themselves and don't prepare, don't have food. I mean, we live differently than most people. We grow our own food. We can sprout. So even if we lose power for an extended period of time, I've got well water and I have backup systems so I can have well water even if the power's out. We can grow our own food. We can have fresh live food even if the grocery stores are shut down for months. And on and on and on.
Wow, you guys are prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not so much hurricane preparedness as it is this is how we want to live. We want to eat high vibration, nutrient dense food, and we're not going to be able to buy it in any health food store. And so we've got to grow it. We have to grow it ourselves. So we grow a lot of our own food.
Yeah, of course. The mainstream media and the alternative media too does fan the flames of fear too. So people are just going to be acting that whole thing out too.
Yeah, we just finally got our first solar generator for the outages we have here in the mountains pretty regularly, and I feel so glad to just be on my first step towards where you already are because.
Well, I'll second that because Sharon's always telling me I can't wait till the next power outage.
I want to try that generator.
And I'm saying this is not something we want to be waiting for.
Well, I'll tell you a little trick that you can do, and we can talk in more detail off the show sometime about this, but I learned from a really cool guy named Al Throckmorton. He's developed a free energy water pump that runs on what's called Brown's gas, which is a fourth phase of water. But he also showed me how to make free energy with a $40 Farberware hot plate from Walmart.
Oh yeah, you told us
And
about this on a previous
yeah,
episode. It's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, it is. It is. It's basically you get one of these inductive hot plates, which are like these stoves that heat up the pan, but the burners don't get hot. And they have little portable ones. And the Farberware brand, he told me, is the only one that works because it's made well. And you put a Tesla pancake coil on it, and the Tesla pancake coil will induce electricity from the inductive heating plate and produce 3 to 5 times the amount of electricity out of the Tesla pancake coil than what's going into the hot plate. So you can use that concept, or you could even just get a hot plate and amplify the electricity. So if if you want to be off grid, or if you just want to be prepared with, say, a solar powered well or whatever, you can have solar power and boost your output 3 to 5 times and spend far less on solar and be self-contained. So these are the kinds of things that if you're out looking and thinking about this kind of stuff, you'll find it. But if you're, living in the status quo, mind-controlled American
Hmm.
viewpoint, you're not going to know about any of this stuff.
Which
And
the three
so,
of us definitely are that.
Well, Ken,
yeah,
before we go off into how to get off the grid, which I do love to talk about, I do want to go back to the hurricane itself because you have some insight into it that I think a lot of people want to hear. A lot of us thought that the hurricane was engineered, and you've expressed the same thought. So I wanted to ask you about that. How do they engineer a hurricane?
well, in my experience, well, first of all, folks have to know I'm not like reading stuff on the internet. I have worked with a lot of advanced technology since the early 90s, starting with water fuel technology and others. And so over the years, I've met a lot of people working with very advanced technologies, and also, bumped into people who have worked or are working for the government in covert programs. Like last year, I met an NSA scientist who was actually working for the NSA against his will, who knows all about this stuff. And so I'm not just like reading stuff on the internet. I'm getting this stuff straight from people that are working with it and dealing with it. And of course, I'm also manufacturing it and experimenting with it as well. But so these hurricanes, there was a technology developed, actually Nikola Tesla developed um, energy technology that scientists now are calling scalar energy technology. And we probably at some point ought to talk more about what scalar energy is. It's also goes by other names, which, orgone. Some people will call it chi or prana or life force or tachyon energy. The Russians call it torsion waves or torsion fields.
Is a
In certain
tensor
circumstances,
is tensor field also this type of energy?
a tensor field is more of a description of certain types of fields work as opposed to a certain type of energy.
I see.
Um, it's kind of like the difference between uh, vector and tensor physics or mathematics. It has to do with how the energy is traveling and how it disperses and that kind of stuff. But what it really is, there are different names for it depending on who's talking about it and what it's doing. But what it really is just superluminal light. It's photonic energy or light that's traveling far faster than what we've been told the speed of light is. I was taught in engineering school that light travels at 186,000 miles per second, and that's a standard fixed speed and it cannot be changed. Well, now conventional science knows that's not true. They know that gravitation and different things can affect the speed of light a little bit. But the reality is that there are forms of light that travel so fast, millions of times faster than what we've been told is the normal speed of light. And when it goes that fast, it gets really weird. And it's going so fast that we can't see it. It doesn't look like light to us. It doesn't illuminate things. It's black. It's invisible. and therefore scientists will call it dark energy or dark matter in some cases. But what it really is superluminal light, and it's coming from these superluminal suns at the centers of galaxies. What's been discovered is now that galaxies, suns, planets, they all have a black hole or a singularity. They're, go by different names, but what they really are is a superluminal sun at their centers. And this energy comes zooming out, and it propagates differently than conventional electromagnetic energy that we're used to. We're used to waves. I was taught in engineering school, for example, that energy flows in these up and down waves, what are called transverse waves. And in truth, they actually spiral. They don't just go up and down. It's just that the way we measure them in the oscilloscopes and things like that, we represent it on a two-dimensional plane. Or when we look at, for example, ocean waves, they look two-dimensional going up and down because gravity is holding them down. But the reality is that these waves normally, they do spiral, but they spiral away from their source, and they broaden as they go away from the source, and they get weaker as they go away from the source. Those are conventional transverse waves. Scalar waves, on the other hand, are like tornadoes. At the source, it's like where the big opening of a tornado is. It's a large vortex of energy, and that energy folds in on itself just like a tornado, and it gets stronger as it goes away from the source until it hits the apex of the vortex. And so this goes against conventional physics, and so mainstream scientists have difficulty wrapping their heads around this stuff, because it acts so weird. It gets stronger as it goes away from the source. That's supposedly impossible, and yet it's not. And so, but the reality is this energy, this superluminal light, is what everything is made of. It's what all matter and energy in our universe is made of ultimately. It slows down and it coagulates into the matter and energy that we can see and measure.
Yes. That was in Cosmic Superimposition by Wilhelm Reich, how the scalar waves, he called orgone energy, waves come together and superimpose until they start to slow down.
Exactly. And Reich observed this phenomenon, what he called bions, of this energy in sealed vacuum tubes that had been heated for over 1,000 degrees and had completely not disinfected. What's the word I'm looking for?
Sterilized?
Kill all life inside.
Yes.
Sterilized, thank you. And sterilized inside these vacuum chambers, and yet these little flashes of blue light would appear spontaneously, and these little life forms that he called bions would form.
Spontaneous generation.
Yes, and that also threw the physics world on its head, I bet.
Precisely. And, and it was poo-pooed for decades until some Japanese researchers, very mainstream ones, replicated Reich's experiments in Japan a few years ago. So,
and the poo-pooing continues, nonetheless.
Of course. That's it. And that's always the way it is. Anybody who's a pioneer always gets laughed at and ignored because it upsets the status quo.
Of course.
And the control mechanisms.
Ken, I've thought this before, but I'm just going to say it now. You could slap a visor on your forehead, call yourself Geordie LaForge, and I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. When you talk about this stuff,
I just a level 1 diagnostic first, and then we need to work with the EPS conduits.
Go to red alert. No, seriously. I when you talk about these advanced scientific concepts, I just sort of lose myself in it because it's so fascinating, and it's so much information. I really do envy you, not just that you're so immersed in it, but that you can retain all of this.
Absolutely, and our listeners just crave it, and we crave it too. So it's a level that is beyond what anyone else is talking about in terms of orgone.
And we're here to satiate their cravings.
Yes. Good. Well, and in the end, the only thing that really matters is what we do with this stuff. And, and the funny thing is, to me, is that, shamans and mystics and people of all kinds throughout history have known about this stuff. They may not have had this viewpoint, this technical modern day physics viewpoint of it, but they totally understood it and worked with it, and so we can too. I just use languaging that the typical Westerner can wrap their heads around,
It's less mystical.
If it sounds, yeah, exactly. And if it sounds too mystical or magical, then people discount it.
Hey,
And
I
don't
tuned
believe it.
out right away when I first heard about orgonite. I wasn't paying any attention because it was mystified, and it was actually after I heard you talk about it that I started to understand what it was from a scientific point of view, and then I was able to start working with it. You find the more spiritual aspects of orgone after you learn the science. Otherwise, it's just confusing. And I think those spiritual
Exactly.
aspects come to you because science is looking for the same thing religions have looked for all along.
Well, they'll deny it till they're blue in the face.
But it's the same thing. We're all looking for God, and that's what.
Oh, precisely.
Yes, that's what
Precisely.
Wilhelm
And
Reich
this
found.
energy, right? And the reason that he found this spontaneous life forming from it is because this energy is the energy of consciousness. That's the major key about this stuff. It goes back to consciousness creating reality. This energy is the energy of consciousness. And, in religious terms, some people will say we are the hands of God. Well, if you look at the way this energy flows from the centers of galaxies, it spirals and it branches as it goes. And so it's spiraling and it's fractaling and it's relayed from sun to sun to sun outward through the galaxy. And we are antennas of it. We are fractal antennas. Our bodies are fractal. Our hands, our arms, our legs, our nervous system, our blood system, our lymph system, our cellular structure, our brain.
Stop. You're freaking me out. You're freaking me out.
It's
beautiful. It's all orgone.
Fractals.
Yeah.
It's all fractals. Trees, plants, they're all fractals. We're all fractal antennas on the surface of this earth. And we're picking up this energy that's coming down from the sun and up from the center of the earth. And then we broadcast it outward. So
I love that this is the answer to how our hurricane's engineered, by the way.
And I was kidding, by the way. I'm not great, actually freaking
but anyway.
out. This is a lot better than the transhumanist agenda for sure.
And it's because there's no technology that is superior to biology. Biology is the ultimate technology. So it's just smarter to work with it. The transhumanist agenda comes from a limited understanding of reality and a
Absolutely. Yes, a 3D construct, actually. It's very lower dimensional to think that the only way that a human can ascend is to merge with machine, when in actuality, the technologies we have that are free energy, invisible technologies, are in fact way more powerful than anything we can make with the machine.
Far superior.
And actually, I think this is great that we went into this because we're going to talk about the hurricane, but it's very important that we understand the energy of life and how it works.
Right.
And you had mentioned that the hurricanes are generated through scalar interferometry. And I wonder if I'm saying that correctly. Right. And I remember sometime in the past you mentioning that scalar energy, although it's the stuff of life, it can be misused. And see, this is something that our listeners really want to know about. People ask me about that, and they think scalar energy is a weapon, but I understand scalar energy as being orgone, the stuff of life. So how is it that it can be turned to negative? And of course, then how do we turn it back?
That's a really good question, a really good point. And it's like any kind of energy or anything. You can use it for constructive purposes or destructive. I mean, look at light. You can use lasers for healing, or you can use lasers to kill people. Or destroy things. So it's simply an application of this energy. And one little tidbit before we get into the hurricane, because I am going to get into the specifics of the hurricane, but one little tidbit you made me think of talking about this transhumanist agenda, that also comes from the influence of machine intelligence affecting our biological reality. I had encounters with some reptilian extraterrestrials that introduced me to the concept of these, what they call the machine kingdom, which was a reality where sentient machines existed, and they needed biological organisms to manifest themselves. And the way that they do that is by using their consciousness to go into the dream state of biological organisms, people, humans, and others, and get them to dream up machines. And of course, initially they're very crude machines, and over millennia they evolve and become more and more sophisticated until that population develops artificial intelligence. And once they develop artificial intelligence, these machines' consciousness can come into it and then manifest themselves and even take over the biological organisms. And I was told this and I thought, wow, that's really fascinating. And then in the Ringing Cedars books, which is a bunch of channel material ultimately, there's actually a whole chapter dedicated to that concept of this machine world, this machine kingdom, right? So interestingly enough, now too, there are secret space program whistleblowers who are coming out talking about this artificial intelligence infestation on this planet that's having this influence. So that's also where this transhumanist agenda is coming from.
Yes.
So
This has been going on for
that being
thousands of
said,
years, too.
absolutely, absolutely,
Tens of thousands of years, for all we know.
yeah, and really for eternity, in different times and places. But anyway, so there's a little bit about that. But with this hurricane being engineered, so when you understand the nature of this energy that scientists are calling scalar energy, what I found, by the way, too, is that mainstream scientists typically laugh and poo-poo this concept of scalar energy. But let me tell you, the military scientists and the people in NSA I've met, they totally know all about it. They don't laugh at it at all. They're using it. They know about it. It's common knowledge within these organizations, within the scientific communities in them. So they know all about it. And it ultimately, most of it, I think they got, or a lot of it they got from Tesla. But anyway, so you can build devices that can capture this energy that's coming down to us from our sun and up from the center of the earth, because it's been discovered the earth has a sun inside of it, or a singularity. Some people call it a singularity or a black hole, but it's a superluminal sun. And every sun and planet in our galaxy has these, because the whole cosmos is this web that this energy is relayed through from sun to sun to sun and out through the planets. So as I said, it's coming up from the center of the earth to us. It's coming down from the sun. We are antennas that pick it up, and then we radiate outward a scalar field of our own, and we modulate the frequency of it by our state of being. So with weather modification, Tesla discovered that you can build devices that will capture this energy and amplify it and direct it and use it for various purposes. And one of those purposes was creating earthquakes. Another one was weather modification. And so when all of his papers and research were stolen from him at his death by the US government, they started using it in covert applications, and it's evolved to the point now where it's used routinely. And so one of those technologies is called scalar interferometry. And some people may have heard of the HAARP antennas, HAARP. Those have been decommissioned now, but they were these very large antennas that were either on the surface of the earth that took several acres, and basically this big antenna complex that could direct scalar energy into the atmosphere and bounce around through the atmosphere and have it target certain areas and inject huge amounts of energy into an area. And that could be used to steer or create weather or earthquakes or other things. You could, for example, target a military force, and you could scramble their brains or make them believe that they were seeing some type of an event that would make them lay down their arms. That was actually used in the first Gulf War with Saddam Hussein's forces. If people, you can Google this, and if you go back and look at the history of that first war in Iraq with, not Afghanistan, but Iraq, with George Herbert Walker Bush, the Iraqi soldiers laid down their weapons and gave up immediately. And the reason they did was because they were using this, probably a combination of technologies, to project the vision of Allah talking to them, telling them to lay down their weapons.
Is it also possible that the whole thing was just acted out anyway? I tend to think these days as wars being largely acted out. Maybe through mind control, but I just don't see it anymore in the same way that I used to.
Oh, absolutely. You have to be mind controlled to be a soldier to begin. That's what boot camp is, for one thing. And then, there's a lot of conditioning and mind control, for people in the military. But there's many aspects to it. And when you look at a big level, like a big philosophical level, we're all engaged in these karmic dramas that we're acting out. So it's really just a big game of consciousness, and the idea that there are good guys and bad guys is really a more localized 3D concept.
So
But with that
regarding,
being said,
oh, sorry. I was just going to
well,
ask
with that
something
being
about
said, so they've
HARP.
got these. Yeah, so HARP was decommissioned because now they've developed scalar interferometers that are much smaller and more mobile. And so I believe they're calling them H-wave or D-wave technology.
But are they
And
using
but it's
orgone though? I mean, because what I'm
yeah,
hearing is that
orgone is just a term that Wilhelm Reich came up with to describe this energy, because back in the day when he was working with this stuff, you have to understand Reich's background, first of all, was psychiatry. He was a contemporary and a friend um, of Freud, Sigmund Freud. And Freud and Wilhelm Reich both were studying human sexuality, and particularly aberrations in human sexuality. And whereas Freud believed it was all the ego and id stuff, Reich believed that it was an energetic that was
yes,
causing it.
it
So he started
bioenergetic.
studying that.
Hmm.
Exactly. And in studying that, that's where he discovered that there was, in fact, this energy that was involved in these sexual aberrations. And he called it orgone because it was, he was studying the orgasm, and he coined the term based on that. And he didn't have a background in physics, and even if he did, back in those days, nobody had a lexicon for this stuff.
Well, what they
Tesla
found
was the only one really.
with the cloudbusters, this is why I ask about HARP, is because if they're using orgone incorrectly, which it's hard to do with orgonite, it's like impossible to use it incorrectly. But with these more powerful devices, with a cloudbuster, you could create catastrophic weather if you weren't careful because it was so
That
powerful.
exactly,
And so that's why
exactly.
I'm asking, because I think a lot of people think orgonite can be dangerous, or that the orgonite cloudbuster or chembuster can be dangerous. And I always explain that these machines are not the same kind of a thing. These are very small devices that are just generating a moderate amount of free energy. And the best way to use them is actually to grid the land to increase the effect, but that they don't cause cataclysms. I have noticed,
No, and I
however,
think
that when we gift hundreds at a time, it can cause an extreme rain.
right. Because it's trying to balance things very quickly. But the reason that orgonite typically, I've never encountered any orgonite that causes detrimental effects. I've seen a lot of it that doesn't do much, but I
Yeah, me
haven't,
too.
you know, and the reason is because here's the physics of what Reich was doing with his cloudbusters versus orgonite. Uh, Reich started experimenting with these orgone boxes, as he called them, where he would layer sheets of metal, sandwich them with layers of a electrical non-conductor like wool or beeswax.
Right, the
And
accumulators.
precisely, and what these boxes would do is collect what he called orgone inside, which was this scalar energy, or whatever you want to call it, this life force that's flowing through the cosmos. It would concentrate it in frequencies that were very beneficial to living organisms, and you could put somebody inside these boxes and they would heal of major diseases. So um, I don't know how Reich came up with the concept, but what he was doing was pretty brilliant, because the sheets of metal acted as scalar wave guides for this energy coming from the earth and from the sun. And the non-conductors in between them were not just non-conductors, they were also materials that were high in monoatomic elements, or ormus, uh, wool, bone, stone, particularly volcanic stone, beeswax. It's all high in these monoatomic elements, and monoatomics are conductors of scalar energy. So he starts out with these boxes and other devices, and then he extrapolated those concepts to his cloudbuster device, which was basically, it looks like a big Gatling gun of a bunch of pipes bundled together with flexible tubes that go from the back of them to a water source, a pond, or depending on this, typically with him it was a pond because he was using large cloudbusters. And what it would do, these pipes would act as, they were very specific lengths, very specific diameters, and made of very specific materials. And they would act as a scalar wave antenna. And they would draw these negative, so-called negative frequencies of scalar energy that was in the atmosphere from human activity draw it down and collect it in these tubes, and then ground it into the body of water, which would damage the body of water. And if anybody was touching the cloudbuster or got too close to it, it could make them very sick or even kill them. And so, and it's because he was basically using this kind of like a lightning rod to ground this negative energy, as he called it, negative orgone, or
DOR. Deadly orgone radiation. Yeah. Yes. I wanted to mention that there was an ET element to this, by the way, and I did want to ask you about that in relation to hurricanes too, because Reich discovered the DOR, deadly orgone radiation, wasn't just coming from human activity, but had been influencing the Earth for millennia. And he also saw the spaceship connection, where they retreated from the orgone from his cloudbuster, and where they were always present when you could see DOR in the atmosphere. So there was this otherworldly connection. And I just wanted to mention that there were a couple of catastrophic weather events in 1938 that kind of look engineered to me, even though this is before the start of human weather engineering. Although I would have to say there have been humans involved in weather engineering through rain dances and ceremonies for a long time, and using their own chi. But there were a couple of catastrophes, the Los Angeles flood of 1938, in which in just 5 days, a year's worth of rain fell, 115 were dead. There was $78 million worth of damage, which today would be $1.3 billion. There was that. There was the Great New England Hurricane in 1938, which also acted so much like an engineered storm. It moved very quickly it was going from the west coast of Africa to Florida, quickly veered 45 degrees northward and barreled into New York with wind speeds of 160 degrees, 682 dead, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage. So there was these two storms that I've been looking into that really looked engineered. So this is why I really think there's an ET interference here. I just wanted to bring that in and ask if you had noticed that too.
Oh, absolutely. And humans and extraterrestrials have been able and have been influencing Earth's weather for millennia. You look at native peoples with rain dances and ceremonies and things like that, and us Western white people think that it's all just religious nonsense, but it's not, because human beings, as I mentioned, we are scalar wave antennas. We are like pyramids or cones or these cloudbusters. We are a fractal antenna that connect with this energy coming from the center of the Earth and from the sun, and we broadcast out a scalar field around us, and we can direct that as well. We create and can enhance a scalar vortex and direct it. And this is why that native people throughout time have gotten together in ceremony in circles, because an individual can create a scalar wave vortex by themselves and send it up into the atmosphere. But when you get together with several people, particularly in a circle, you're creating a much larger, stronger scalar vortex that can not only influence the weather, but can also accelerate manifestation of thought into reality. Because the way that we create our reality is by sending out this scalar energy constantly. And whatever we're focusing on and whatever frequency we're vibing at, we attract similar frequencies that coagulate, slow down, and turn into this reality. So this is how we're individually and collectively co-creating our reality.
So couldn't we stop these storms? We can stop them.
Oh, absolutely.
Just by changing our thought process.
I've taught people how to do it. All you have to do is get into a meditation circle in your backyard. You can clear chemtrails doing that. You can alter the weather. You can create weather. I was at a conference in South Dakota years ago called the Star Knowledge Conference. It was a bunch of Native Americans who had invited Native peoples from all over the world to come and give their testimony to the West and to basically to white people about their interaction with extraterrestrials throughout history. And one of the Native elders got 500 people in the audience to go outside and do a meditation for an hour. And after about 5 minutes of being in this huge circle, holding hands and meditating, this is out in South Dakota in big sky country. There's not a tree in sight. The weather was completely clear blue sky, not a cloud anywhere. And in 5 minutes, there was a cloud that was shaped like a smoke ring a few hundred feet above the circle of people, the exact same size as the circle of people. And it stayed there for the full hour that we meditated. And as soon as the meditation circle broke up, when everybody left, the cloud disappeared. The native people have known this for millennia, and that's why they do these ceremonies. They know they absolutely can affect the weather because of this scalar energy. They may not know all the physics, they just know the tradition, and they were probably taught it by extraterrestrials. Of course, the ETs know about this stuff. They have technologies to manipulate weather. There's been extraterrestrial manipulation of this planet as long as it's been around, way before we even got here.
That's what I thought.
And so, yes, and Wilhelm Reich observed this when he was pointing his cloud busters up the sky. It's sending out these scalar vortexes, and those vortexes will destabilize an anti-gravity field, an anti-gravity generator. I actually know three different people who have developed anti-gravity time-traveling flying saucers, and there are different ways of doing it, but one of the ways is by creating a vortex. You actually create a toroidal field, a scalar field, and it generates a very strong vortex out of one end that goes out and wraps around, comes back in the other. So you've got this donut-shaped field and these vortexes going in and out of the field that creates anti-gravity. And it has a lot of interesting side effects. But if you disrupt that, you're going to lose your anti-gravity. And so Reich, he actually has a book. I've got his book. I don't remember the
Contact
title of it.
with Space.
Yes, Contact
That's
with
my
Space.
favorite book.
He's writing about shooting down these flying saucers. He actually knocked them out of the sky,
Yes.
and he goes to the U.S. Air Force and he tells them
Good move.
about this. And of course, and they laugh at him. They didn't, take him seriously or lock him up. They laughed at him.
Well, they gave him
and
a
they blew him
survey. Do you see the survey printed in that book? They already knew everything.
Right. But they didn't really do anything with him until he started modifying the weather.
Yeah.
And then they locked him up.
Yes.
All of his stuff.
Exactly.
So yes, there's definitely an extraterrestrial component, and it goes, of course, way beyond weather manipulation. There are benevolent and negative ETs that have been messing with Earth for millennia.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that component.
Definitely.
But the good news is, because our own biology can modify the weather, and in fact, our own biology, I was told by these reptilian ETs that our own biology, that we human beings, not only can we influence weather, we create the weather.
That's what I
And
think
the reason,
too.
Yeah,
We actually
and the
changed the
reason that
weather
we-
for our wedding.
That's true.
We actually did decide on the temperature we wanted. And for a week prior, we made sure that would happen. And there was an engineered heat wave going on, which we saw disintegrate, which was really exciting. And we had exactly what we wanted, 72 degrees.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been with groups of people that were very enlightened and empowered that did the same thing. Made it rain, made it not rain. Absolutely, we have that power. And when you look at us macroscopically, we are little scalar antennas sticking up from the surface of the Earth, just like the plants on this planet. All of the plants on this planet, they're grounded into the Earth. Their root systems are antennas that are picking up the scalar energy coming from the inside of the Earth, and the branches reaching up are collecting the energy coming from the sun and bringing it and creating these localized fields. And they have an influence on the weather and a lot of other things. But we absolutely do, and it's the emotional imbalances on this planet are what creates these weather extremes. And the ETs know about this. I was just listening to an interview with a guy who claimed to be from the inner Earth, who said that they don't have these kinds of weather extremes inside the Earth because they've been around for millions of years, and they do not have the conflict within them that humans on the surface do. And of course, a lot of the conflict has been engineered and manipulated by extraterrestrials. But at any rate, we absolutely, biologically, we have the ability to alter and modify weather. And people, all they have to do is get together in groups and practice and try it out. I've always, since I learned about working with energy, I've always gotten together with whoever was near me and created an energetic bubble around my property whenever we had hurricanes or tornadoes coming through or whatever. And it's always been fine. When everything around me was destroyed and our houses and our property is fine. And I also believe that the earth is a living sentient being, and it knows the people who are working to help it and protect it. I think it protects them.
Mm-hmm.
And the native peoples have said this as well. So anyway, so you've got all these ideas going on, right? Now, our illustrious government and other governments know about this stuff. They know about Tesla's technology. They've had it for many decades now. And they build these scalar interferometers. And my understanding from people working with this technology is that they can create hurricanes and tornadoes and things with this technology, but it's not easy to do and it's not very predictable. But they definitely can steer these storms. So when they start to form, they can feed them large amounts of energy, heat up the ocean, heat up the atmosphere, and intensify the storms.
I see. And so to combat that, I wanted to ask, could you please explain the devices that you use in hurricane abatement?
Yes.
And I also have to say, you have the bridge, Mr. LaForge.
Well, Captain, let me get to that level 1 diagnostic first, and I'll get back to you.
I'll be in my ready room.
Okay. We're geeks. So,
who is we? You got a mouse in your back pocket?
Yeah. So anyway, yes, we can do. I'll explain what we can do about it, but a little bit more about what our governments are doing. They and how you can tell that they're doing this. It's like, because when you say this, people just think you're a nut job because you're just some paranoid schizophrenic, but you can actually see the telltale signs of it. And last year when Hurricane Matthew came through, and I do presentations on this, and I actually show images of the sky when scalar interferometry is being used, because it will either create fractal patterns in the clouds or it will create longitudinal wave patterns in the clouds. And what that will look like from the surface is these parallel lines. It looks like somebody plowed the clouds, and there's perfect parallel lines of clear sky and cloud.
There's ripples. There's ripples in the clouds, like little fine lines. And you actually see you're going to talk about your devices, but with orgonite, you can actually see how it breaks that up. Those fine lines. Right. It starts to, the harp ripples.
Yeah,
I call them the harp ripples.
Geoengineering disinformants call them harp ripples.
Well, I call them harp ripples because that's just what I call them. But the ripples start to harples. They kind of become less extreme, and you see water vapor start to form into puffy clouds, and they're still kind of in lines, but the lines become less defined, and then eventually it's gone, and you've just got the puffy clouds and the blue sky.
Right, and that can be those ripples can be explained away when they're not too widespread and too uniform. People can explain them away as natural wave formations, because you do get those natural formations sometimes. But it's like you said, you go sticking a scalar wave generator or orgone device out there, and that stuff disappears. And the fractal patterns, definitely you don't find that in any natural formation of clouds. But if you see these ripples and it's not like just grossly, ridiculously perfect and spreading for hundreds of miles, people say, oh, it's just a natural wave formation. But when you're looking at satellite views of these hurricanes, you will see huge amounts of these perfect parallel longitudinal wave patterns in the clouds, and you'll see these fractal patterns. And you'll also see other patterns that, if you're familiar with scalar interferometry, you'll see these like salt and pepper and checkerboard patterns also mixed in there. And so Matthew last year had those telltale signs. I was watching it when it was south of Florida before it got to Cuba, and it was loaded up with all that. And at one point, Matthew actually had 2 eyes, which I don't know if that can occur naturally. It seems to me extremely unlikely.
That would be like 2 hurricanes. It would be like 2 separate hurricanes coming together.
Yeah. Now, maybe you can explain that away as a natural phenomenon, but it certainly had ridiculous amounts of longitudinal and fractal wave patterns in it. And then as soon as it got into the field area of my devices in South Florida, it fell apart, and that went away. and it wound up bouncing off. Well, actually, usually in the past they just fall apart, and we don't, we just don't have to worry about them. But Matthew did weaken from, I think, a Category 5 to a Category 3 when it hit the home shield fields, and instead of going up the East Coast, inside the East Coast of Florida as was predicted, and hitting Miami, it stayed east of all of us and stayed offshore, just about 75 miles offshore, and it did much less damage. And
Yeah, I was
so,
watching
and
Irma decrease too, and I kept thinking about you every time I saw it being reduced in its extremity. I thought this must be
yeah,
Ken.
and there are other people as well. There are other people gifting orgonite all over the place, and well before I ever did anything.
Oh, can I ask
And
you
I
about
know that has had an
the
effect.
cell towers down there? Because the people who were gifting orgonite in that area, they were gifting waterways, and I think also cell towers, which is what we do here. Did the cell phone towers, did those have something to do with hurricanes? Because we know they cause drought in California, but I'm not sure if they can be used to generate storms. Can they?
That's a good question. In my experience, cell towers have military stuff on them that the cell companies do not acknowledge. That
Hmm.
much I know because I have seen a couple of instances where we had some of my Scalar devices for protecting against EMF. They got too close to a cell tower, and the cell company shows up with this really weird looking detector and says, your device is interfering with our cell tower. Now that's impossible because these Scalar devices that I built do not interfere with any kind of electromagnetic radiation. They can structure it
Right.
and make it less damaging, but they don't interfere with the signal at all.
Right.
So that told me that there's something scalar on these towers, because it would definitely interfere with a scalar weapon of some kind. So it's highly likely that yes, these antennas have other military stuff on them that's manipulating weather, probably also, I'm sure, manipulating consciousness from what I hear, and suppressing people's health and immune systems and making them more docile, and etc.
Can you
Uh,
clarify the scalar weapon, since I know scalar energy is orgone energy, and I just would like to understand more what you mean. Is this actually not orgone that you're talking about, but DOR in fact? Because we find that the cell towers are emitters of DOR rather than OR.
yeah, the only difference between DOR and OR, or healing scalar energy or deadly scalar energy or any of that, is frequency. It's
Right.
frequency. It's
So,
it's
so what's a scalar
so
weapon?
well, the scalar weapon is the interferometer.
Okay.
That's what they call them. There are different sizes and strengths of them, but the most commonly known ones were the HARP antennas, which have been traded out now for D-Wave, I believe is what it's called. But it's scalar interferometry. It's just these generators. They're power generators, as opposed to orgonite devices and cloud busters and things like that. Those are passive devices that act like antennas. They capture the energy coming from the earth and the sun, and then they create a localized field, or they create a localized vortex.
Mm-hmm.
And
So,
typically,
yes, go
like
on.
with orgonite, if you think about what orgonite is, and for those people that don't know what orgonite is, it's basically a material that you can make yourself using some kind of non-conducting resin or substrate like plaster or fiberglass or epoxy or something like that. And you put metal particles into it, and you put mineral particles into it. And in my experience, the smaller the particles, the stronger the orgonite, because one of the reasons why orgonite, I've never seen any damaging orgonite, is because what's primarily creating the scalar energy in orgonite is what's called the Casimir effect, which is simply an observation that when you put two plates of metal very close together, like a 16th of an inch apart, they will create an electric charge, and they will also create scalar waves. And so when you're making orgonite, you're putting these metal particles very close together in this substrate, and they get close together and they create the Casimir effect, and that creates scalar waves. So it's just like if you have let's say you got a gallon jar, and you put a bunch of big marbles into it. you're going to have a certain amount of surface area on all those marbles inside that jar, right? And then if you take little tiny glass beads and stick them in there, you're going to have exponentially more surface area on those beads because you've just got a lot more surface packed into that space. Right. So it's the same thing with orgonite. This, you use these finer particles, you're going to get more of the Casimir effect and strong orgonite.
Well, I don't find that plaster I do not find to be a useful material in making orgonite, though.
I agree.
I use a resin which would, create more of the piezoelectric effects.
Yeah, the catalyzing. Yeah. Any catalyzing resin will do that.
Precise. That's it.
Can I just go back real quick before I forget about the scalar interferometer, because I just wanted to clarify, is that something that is releasing DOR then? So is that how we should look at it?
Well, I would say I tend to avoid using the orgone and DOR simply because it's an inaccurate description. You're talking about DOR, what you're really talking about is any scalar frequency that is damaging to living organisms. So it could be a broad range of frequencies, but yeah, basically these interferometers, you could build an interferometer that would heal people, that cure people of cancer. And as a matter of fact, that's exactly what a Rife machine is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's a scalar wave generator. And there are many other devices like that.
Okay, I get it. Actually, so you're saying it's frequency. So the frequency of life, orgone energy, is a specific frequency of life. And the scalar interferometer is working with a frequency that is not conducive to life.
Life negating.
It's life negating, right?
Precisely.
Okay.
Precisely. So for example, the DOR that Wilhelm Reich was bumping into and accumulating and neutralizing would have a certain frequency based on whatever the heck was creating it. It could be electromagnetic pollution from the grid, from all the normal stuff that we know about. It could be from covert military stuff. It can be from ET stuff. It's probably a mixture of all of that. Mm-hmm. And depending on where you're at and what you're doing, it's going to be certain types of frequency, certain frequency ranges. If you're for example, in Sedona, Arizona, where you've got 5 big crystal formations underneath that area that create some natural vortexes that are very healing and very beneficial to living organisms, the powers that be know all about that. And that's why that area attracts a lot of very high vibrational, really smart, intelligent people doing a lot of good things for the earth. That area is targeted with negative scalar interferometers.
I believe it. So, do you know about the silicon trees? Have you seen There Are No Forests on Earth?
No.
Okay. See, this is a mind blower. It was a little over a year ago that Gabe and I saw this film, and it changed our entire view of the Earth. There are many formations that we know as mesas, and in fact, some of them are mountains. But in this film, the filmmaker, who was a young man from Russia, and I don't know how he came up with this. I think it was like ET communication. He realized that a lot of these mesas, such as Devil's Tower and the mesas in Sedona, are actually the remains of ancient silicon trees. And those crystal formations underground are the root systems. It changes your view of everything.
I
did see that.
Especially the sequence where they do an A and B of an actual carbon tree stump and like a zoomed out view of these
mesas
and those formations, and it's just, and they do one after another and it's so,
and what I'm thinking is that they took down these trees, whoever did it, who we never find out in the film, but I believe they were silicon based artificial intelligence life forms or entities, not really life, and that they did this for whatever reason they had to do to lower the vibration of Earth and to traumatize the planet and its inhabitants. I think that those ancient trees were antennae that reached from the inside of the Earth and projected into the galactic core, and they were crystalline structures.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this because, I mean, that's what trees do. That's exactly what, wood trees do.
Yeah, carbon.
I had a very interesting... Yeah, I would suspect that they may have been natural formations that were beneficial to Earth and were destroyed by the destruction of Maldek, the planet Maldek. And there's a long story behind that. But I was we'll talk about the Bosnian pyramids in a bit, because
Yes,
I was
yes.
visiting the Bosnian pyramids, and I was hanging out with Russian pyramid scientist Valery Uvrov, and he is a mind-blowing person to talk to. I love the guy. He's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And early in his career, he worked for the Russian military, and it was his job to investigate UFOs and those kind of phenomena. And he told me that he actually was taken up on a ship by some extraterrestrials and shown his other lifetimes. And one of them was as a high-ranking officer, maybe a general, in the Martian military, like hundreds of thousands of years ago, before there was another planet in our solar system that was very large called Maldek, and Mars was its moon. And they both had human populations on them, but because of their different sizes and gravitation, the people on Maldek were very large, like 60 to 90 feet tall, and the people on Mars were closer to our size. And they developed about the same rate technologically, and when they developed space travel and found out of each other, they got into a big war. And the Martians, being smaller in stature and having a smaller planet, um, it's a very long story, but basically they knew about this Death Star, just like straight out of Star Wars, that was in our solar system to help protect us against negative ETs. And they took it, reverse engineered it, or manipulated it, and used it to destroy Maldek. And so Maldek, was blown apart. There's a whole long story about all this. This is like a really short synopsis, but basically all these Maldekians and Martians had a huge karmic debt because of this, destroying an entire planet. The atmosphere from the explosion of Maldek blew the atmosphere off of Mars and killed everybody on Mars. And after millennia, hundreds of thousands of years of them being in some kind of discarnate limbo, some very advanced ETs started helping them incarnate back onto planets around the solar system. And there's a lot of other really interesting things he told me about this, that he was told by these ETs. So, but one of the things that he mentioned was that that things had to be done to rebalance the gravitational forces and the orbits of the planets in our solar system. Otherwise, the whole solar system would have just been thrown out of kilter and destroyed. And so part of that was the construction of our moon as an artificial satellite for not only observing us by different ET races, but balancing the orbit of the Earth. And he said that there was also these very advanced ETs created a planet directly opposite the Earth, directly opposite from the sun, so that we never see it because it's always orbiting opposite of us in our solar system, and we don't see it, but it's the same size as the Earth, and it's populated, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all these really crazy stories that he's telling me about, and now these secret space program people are coming out and saying the same kinds of stuff. And part of that is that on these planets, and also inside the inner Earth and the hollow Earth, that we have these crystalline formations that are humongous, and they grow just like trees. I mean, and we already know this. It's conventional science. You can grow sugar crystals in a jar. They grow like a plant. And so these big stumps of these silicon trees, they were probably natural formations, I would suspect, of the Earth itself, and were probably very beneficial. And the reason I say that is because when you make orgonite, what do you put into it?
Crystals and minerals.
Right.
Minerals, yeah.
Exactly. And why?
Well,
why do you put
that's the energy source. They have the memory. Those crystals are the ones that release the orgone.
Because
what
YouTube
really
tells
are.
me to.
Well, because you told me to, actually.
Hail YouTube.
Well, but what crystals really are, they are fractal antennas that modulate the frequency of the energy flowing through them. So just like if you want to create, if you want to beam some energy somewhere, you have to create an antenna that is tuned to the frequency you want to beam. It's like a radio antenna. If you're sending out a certain frequency, you have to tune it to that frequency to send out that signal.
Yeah,
that
you
frequency.
can program them too. We found that you can actually program them.
Oh, absolutely. crystals hold information as well as they can act as conduits for transmitting energy. But they're what in conventional science they call crystals oscillators, because when you send energy through them, they will change the frequency of the energy to the frequency of the crystal based on its atomic structure, and it's what's called its crystalline lattice. So you shoot energy into it one frequency, it'll come out the other side always the frequency of that crystal. And this is used extensively in electronics. So if you've got these silicon trees, these crystalline trees, and they're natural formations that are created from the earth, they are going to be a part of the earth's chakra system, and they're going to have natural frequencies that are beneficial to living organisms. So I would suspect that the remnants of these things were not something that were, I mean, there may have been some that were placed here that were negative, for control purposes, but I would suspect any that were naturally occurring came from the earth itself and probably had a lot of really good benefits.
Yeah, I think
they might have been just this explosion of Maldek.
Well, so now
a lot of damage by that.
Now that you've mentioned the Bosnian pyramids, that was one of the main reasons we're talking to you today. I wanted to ask you about those as, well, in general, as generators. What was their purpose? I mean, can you tell us about your visit to the pyramids and what you found there?
Yes. Yeah, I've known about the Bosnian pyramids for, 4 or 5 years when they, I think Dr. Samir Osmanagic, who's an archaeologist, discovered them. He's from Bosnia. And he was touring the area outside of Sarajevo and noticed these mountains that appear to be perfect pyramids. They were covered with trees and grass and stuff, but they were huge. I mean, they're by far the largest pyramids in the world. And he started excavating them. He intuitively figured they were pyramids and started excavating them and found out that they had all of these very unusual properties and what appeared to be unnatural structure to them. And so he started excavating them, I think 2008, I believe it was. Maybe before that, but at any rate, so he went to the Bosnian government, he went to different archaeological organizations, universities, to try and get funding to do an excavation and to do study these things, and they all blew him off. They sent representatives out and said that no, these are natural mountains, there's nothing artificial about them. Despite the overwhelming evidence, when they started measuring energy and things on them, and also finding obviously artificial artifacts built inside of these things, deep inside of them, that these things were not just natural mountains. We'll get more into that. But basically, because he couldn't get any official backing or funding, and in fact, the mainstream archaeological community has pretty much poo-pooed him and attacked him because it would change history. It would completely change human history.
Wikipedia has a lot of Wikipedia is very disparaging about it. Of course, when you look at the picture that accompanies the article, you see pyramids. I mean, they say it's a natural hill formation. But
then they say the Devil's Tower is a basalt outcropping.
That's true.
Which is also total nonsense.
So I could see that they were pyramids.
Well, there's so much overwhelming evidence now that they've had years of study on these things and they've taken a lot of measurements. I mean, first of all, the faces of the pyramid are aligned perfectly with true north. Perfectly. I mean, to the third decimal point, 0.000. Their angles of inclination on the walls are perfect sacred geometry, ratios of pi and phi and that kind of stuff. They've discovered tunnels inside of them that they've excavated, and the tunnels point in perfectly aligned directions, not only with northeast, west, and south, but also with other pyramids and structures in the area. They've discovered a perfect cone that appears to be made by somebody, and also it's a whole complex of pyramids. It's not just one pyramid. The Pyramid of the Sun, which is the largest one, they have excavated the most. They also have a smaller one called the Pyramid of the Moon, and these are tuned to different energies. So when they measure different types of energy, whether it's scalar waves or sound or electricity or infrared, ultraviolet, all these different bands of energy, they see not only very specific frequencies with all of them, but they also correlate to the exact same frequencies of energy found on other pyramids around the world that mainstream archaeologists do acknowledge. So they're finding the same readings on these pyramids as they are on other pyramids around the world that are accepted by mainstream archaeology. The reason mainstream archaeology generally doesn't accept these, aside from the fact that it would change human history, and also that it would draw tourism away from the Egyptian pyramids and other pyramids, is because these pyramids are constructed differently. We've seen the Egyptian pyramids, we've seen the big blocks of stone, and people wonder how they were, cut and put together so precisely and everything. And there's a whole another story about that. But these Bosnian pyramids were constructed differently. They are constructed precisely the way you would construct orgonite.
Wow.
And that's what they are.
That's
they are
amazing.
Giant pieces of orgonite. Yeah. And it's blatantly obvious that these things were constructed for many different reasons. First of all, they've found a lot of obviously constructed structures inside. I'm not going to say man-made because maybe it wasn't human beings that built them. They're estimating them about 40,000 years old, possibly older.
Did they construct obnoxious hippies to sell the orgonite, or not?
I don't know, but apparently there were a lot of people involved in these, or somebody involved in these, because the way these pyramids are made, first of all, they're made out of millions and millions and millions of little round river rocks, just like you would do with orgonite.
Oh my goodness.
And on that scale, as I mentioned, if you understand this physics of orgonite, the Casimir effect, by having these particles close together, creating the Casimir effect, which creates the scalar waves, and then also having the crystals, as you mentioned, plaster and substrates that don't shrink around the crystals in the orgonite don't work very well, because part of what creates the scalar energy in orgonite is the shrinking of the resin squeezing on the crystals. And when you squeeze on the crystals, it creates scalar energy, and it increases the scalar energy that these crystals put out. That's the piezoelectric effect.
Yes.
So when you look at this giant mountain, and it's made out of millions of these little river rocks, about 2-3 inches in diameter, and they're all in close proximity, they're all packed together very tightly, and guess what the substrate around them is? It's clay.
Oh, I see.
And the clay is very high in monoatomic elements. So you've got all these river rocks, which are made out of quartz and high ormus stones, which automatically makes them, aside from being crystalline and putting out scalar energy, they're high in ormus, which increases their scalar energy output. Then they're packed with clay around them, which is high in ormus. And then when you build this whole huge mountain, just the weight of the mountain itself puts so much pressure on that creates massive amounts of the piezoelectric effect.
It's amazing.
It's really not too hard to see why, A, this man never got any funding, and B, why it is suppressed so ardently. And in fact, now I'm wondering, I remember when I was a kid, that whole region, in the early and mid 90s was very much war-torn, and I'm wondering if that whole situation might just have been a charade to try and bring the energy down in that region, because I know Bosnia, it's right in the middle of Serbia and Croatia and all of that entire area. That the whole region was very badly affected at that time.
Well, I was told by these reptilian ETs that a lot of times the reason we have wars and war-torn areas habitually is to keep people out of them, because they have a lot of advanced technologies and artifacts that the powers that be do not want people going and pilfering over.
That would explain the Middle East.
Yeah, I don't want to go there.
Precisely. And, in supposedly in Afghanistan, they found a Vimana, which is an ancient spaceship that supposedly has some kind of a time well around it. And the U.S. military has tried to go in and pull this thing out, and anybody that gets within a certain distance of it, they just disappear. They just phase out of our time. And there's other stories about things like that around the planet. But Samir Osmanagic believes that somebody intentionally shut these pyramids down energetically because there's all these tunnels inside of them for different purposes that were all obviously backfilled with a different substrate than what the rest of the pyramid is built with. And so it may have been by somebody benevolent who didn't want, let's say, a negative regime coming in and using them as weapons, or it may have been to suppress consciousness, or and it's hard to say. But that was one of the things I suspected when I visited Bosnia. It's so obviously poor and war torn and has been perpetually kept in that state for a long, long time. And it just made me wonder if there are a lot of ancient treasures there that are being kept out of the public eye by maintaining war. Because I was in Croatia as well, and one of the ladies I was staying with joked around. She said, "Yeah, Croatia likes to have a war about every 20 years," and and it's sad to say, but it's like, I mean, obviously part of it is definitely cultural. You've got different religions there that have different interests and agendas. I'm not saying that it's all just a big conspiracy, but certainly uh, the energetics normally when you have pyramids that are constructed to have beneficial energies, it usually enhances life and consciousness, and you see a flourishing rather than war and disharmony. So yeah, I find it very suspicious that that has been going on there for so long. Um, but I also see, very interestingly, now that Samir is excavating these pyramids and reactivating them energetically, which they measure. It's not like we're just making this stuff up. He's measuring electrical current and potential on these things and infrared energy coming off of them and all kinds of stuff. They see that as they excavate these things, the energy is increasing. And so that seems to be attracting more high vibe people to the area.
Would you ever consider, Ken, going to work for perhaps a Bosnian tourism agency? just crazy. Come to Bosnia and watch Samir activate these ancient pyramids.
I just wanted to mention, though, you said activating them. That's very, very interesting to me, because for a while now I have noticed that the very same orgonite in one person's hands versus another would have a different effect. And I'm realizing something very interesting about these structures, the orgonite and possibly these pyramids too. It's not so much that the device is doing the work, but that our interaction with it is changing our consciousness, and we're the ones doing the work. So it's possible that
Absolutely.
it's the recognition of the pyramid. So when everybody just thought, oh, it's just a hill, it didn't have the same meaning. And when it's recognized as a pyramid, all of a sudden it is being activated, but in fact, we're being activated through our interaction with it.
The pyramid is just facilitating that activation.
Well, that's very true. And I also, from what I've seen and heard about the local people and the Bosnian people in general, I mean, one of the things that struck me as an American, and I've traveled all over the world and I've been to a lot of different places, and places that have been habitually in war or oppressed, like China, for example. I've been around China, and what struck me, it's definitely changing and getting better, particularly around the cities. But in general, 15 or more years ago when I've been in China, hardly anybody smiled there. And it was because of the legacy of the Cultural Revolution of Mao Zedong and all of the horrific things that happened under his regime. Same thing in Bosnia, because they've been so war-torn and so devastated. I mean, hardly anybody there, if anybody, was untouched by, death in the family by that war that they had with Serbia. And so that trauma has been impressed on these people. I saw it everywhere I went. It was like people working the hotel where I was at and locals. Nobody smiled. Everybody looked and acted downtrodden. And of course, a lot of it has to do with the poverty, but it mainly is trauma. It's from huge doses of trauma that has not been healed and resolved. And so that's one of the big challenges that that Bosnia is going to face, that the people of Bosnia need to get help to do healing and clearing emotional trauma from what they've been through. And I think that pyramid, as Samir activates it more and more, I think that is going to be a huge catalyst for that.
I think that it will be. And by the way, there is an orgonite gifter in Shanghai that contacted me, and he has a Facebook page called Orgone Gorillas, and it's really cool. They put orgonite all over the city. I mean, it's him. I don't know who else, but it really changed things over there. So we're seeing this worldwide consciousness awakening that we've been talking about for a long time now. But it is happening through the orgone, the life energy of the earth, and through us. And I think this pyramid discovery is phenomenal. I believe they discovered them around 2005. Is that right?
Right. And that's an important thing for people to understand, because when you look at the state of the world, particularly in the mainstream media, one would think that the earth is going to hell in a handbasket. But this is something that Valery Uvarev talks a lot about, is how the ancient people all around the world were pyramid builders. Not just these big monstrosities that we know about, but people built lots of pyramids and smaller pyramids for various purposes to benefit themselves. And this is what we've got to get back to. Average people have got to get back to building pyramids and cones and orgonite and all these kinds of things to enhance our local environments. And it shifts consciousness. Man, I mean, it's like when I first put my first powered scalar wave generator here in my town, I started noticing a lot of high vibe people started moving in, and I just thought it was the natural evolution of the town, growing bigger. But then I was talking to a yoga instructor who had moved in, and she said, "Oh yeah, New Smyrna Beach is the new Shakti place." I was like, really? So now we've put hundreds of these things out, and we've seen this consistently, that everything improves: weather, consciousness, people's attitudes, and so this is what we've got to do. We have to take back our power and stay out of victimhood, and don't think, oh, there's nothing we can do. Yeah, start building pyramids, put them out in your yard, study Valery Uvarev's work, study Samir Osmanagich's work, study my work, study your work.
Thank you, Ken.
And build and gift. I mean, you guys, I know what you guys are doing, and you're making huge changes all around California. And this is something important for people to understand. There are lots of people doing this. There are lots of people that are very quietly and surreptitiously going around and fixing things and improving things, and they ain't talking about it because they don't want to get messed with.
Yeah, I used to be that way, and now it just sort of like one day I just got put on an interview, and from then on, I'm providing the information because I guess I was meant to do that. I didn't want to at first.
Well, there's an obligation now.
But
this is part of a Wilhelm Reich quote, is that life is surrounded on all sides by hostility, and that puts us under an obligation. Mm-hmm. That's an incomplete quote, but you get the general idea.
I really do appreciate your acknowledgement of what we did in California, because it's been intense. It's been 3.5 years of intense orgonite gifting, and it takes a while to make all that orgonite and get it out there.
And that it's a huge...
And a lot of money, too.
It is a lot of money. It did cost us money.
And it's such a huge thing, because if even the mainstream media can't get any more out of their drought propaganda, then that's pretty big.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And I was thinking, to put it into Star Trek terms, Gabe, it's like when you have these talents and abilities and knowledge, to not use them would be a waste of material. It's like, when Captain Kirk, when they try to make him resign as a captain and make him an admiral and give him a desk job, and Spock says, "You are destined to be a captain. Anything else would be a waste of material." Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I look at this. It's like,
it's very logical.
Well, yeah, there are lots of things I could do just to make money and have a nice, comfortable life. But I do feel I have an obligation to humanity to share these things that I've learned and figured out and been taught by others, so that everybody can be empowered and fix these problems that we have. And that's what we've got to do.
Thank you, Mr. LaForge.
No, we really do appreciate your work.
No, seriously, thank you.
And, the devices you're making are really changing the landscape and changing people's homes. The Rest Shield and the other orgone energy devices you make are extremely beneficial.
And more importantly, changing people's consciousness.
That's right. See, and it's not just about being able to rest, which is very important, but it is about clearing up all that noise. And we gifted around California, and we saw the same things you've seen where you live, where the mood just increases, improves. We'll go to one place one day and it'll be depressing. like Bakersfield. It was just a wasteland.
Oh, God.
And then going back after gifting to see the changes, the people were lighter, happier, the skies were clean. And finally, we came back through in March of this year. And it was unbelievable the transformation that had happened there in the land. A dry riverbed that was once just dead and yellow and just dirt was filled with water. There was green grass, green trees, and ducks. And this is all in one season.
Yeah, the trees were all cracked and bowed over, and now everything's green and lush. Water's flowing again. Animals have come out of nowhere.
So, yeah, we do want to thank you for the work you're doing in Florida and around the world to spread this knowledge and these devices that everyone can use.
Yeah, and I share your experience with that. I put one of my home shield devices in Sedona, Arizona, the first one I put there, and it reaches out about a 75-mile radius, and so it clears the pollution out of the atmosphere. It sends it out into space. That balances the charge in the atmosphere, and you get normal weather. So they started getting rain. Not too much. They got just exactly what they needed. And I left, and I was gone about a year, and I came back, and I brought a friend with me, and I said to him, now you watch, when we get about 75 miles out of Sedona, you're going to see the desert go from brown to green. And sure enough, boom, like clockwork, there it was. The grass went from brown to green, and all the way up there it was green and lush and streams running, and that's and by the way, Wilhelm Reich mentioned that all of the places on Earth that are deserts, those are not natural.
Right.
Those are sites of ancient wars and things where the geology has been damaged, and it's putting out a frequency of DOR, as he called it, deadly orgone energy, frequencies that are not harmoniously living organisms, and so you get this desert. When you put these orgonite devices and scalar devices in the area that improves the frequency, you see the deserts changing and start coming back to life.
We've seen that here. I saw the Mojave Desert green for the first time in my life this last year. And
mine too.
I just wanted to ask you before we go, is there any new news, anything you want to share, events coming up?
There probably are. For anybody in the Daytona Beach, Florida area, I haven't done any events. Wow. Well, I did some events in April in Philly, but I haven't done any events locally in a couple of years. So I'm going to be hosting a raw food potluck and bonfire at my house on the third Saturday of November. So anybody in the Daytona Beach, Florida area, you're welcome to come and hang out.
Oh man, I wish I could be there. That sounds great.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I intend to do more in the future. From January through August, my travel schedule was really heavy, and then we got the hurricane, and I've been cleaning up, and also we're growing and making improvements to our infrastructure, so I've been busy with that. But
just keep the food away from the bonfire, otherwise it won't be raw anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the cool thing. We got all these people that come, they make
Just
all this raw food. We have an incredible buffet of food, and it's just a lot of fun.
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah.
And I will be in early 2018 doing a speaking tour around Florida, particularly the West Coast and the Naples area, because even though I've spoken there several times before, nobody took me up on buying one of my devices, and I have gifted as much as I can afford to gift. These things are expensive, and it costs me a lot of money to gift them, and so I just am tapped out on the gifting of it. But so my intention is to get some of them around the rest of Florida, and also Texas, the Gulf Coast of Texas. Which,
are they
by the
available
way,
on your website? I'm sorry. I was just going to ask if people can get them.
Not. Yeah, they can buy them, and they have to contact us. They're not on our website yet because our manufacturing facility, we're growing out of it. We're just too crowded right now to keep up with demand if we put them on our website. But if people will email or call us and ask for literature on the home shield device, we can send it to them.
And the website's
we don't talk about it.
freshandalive.com.
But a little scuttlebutt that I heard from an NSA scientist that I know about Hurricane Harvey. He said that it was directed at the Bush oil refineries to damage them. It was some kind of infighting between these so-called cabal or Illuminati types, and that was why Harvey was directed toward Houston and did a lot of damage there.
I would take what these people say with a grain of quartz, if you catch my
The
drift.
government people. I mean, I think a lot of it's just being done to create general misery for humans by an ET source.
Certainly. Well, and also it creates a mass trauma event. That's one thing we didn't really talk about, that all of these events create a mass trauma event that not only traumatizes the people in the local area, but it's splashed all over the news. And people are traumatized en masse. And then one of the side effects of trauma is that it opens people up to programming. And so you trauma, and then you slip in the programming through media and various ways.
We should do this again and then talk a little bit about that, because I know you have a solution for everything, so we won't have to dwell on the negative. And I do want to thank you so much for coming and talking to us today, because your knowledge is just so enlightening and everybody wants to know more. And the Bosnian pyramids are a whole new thing that I never knew about until you told me. So I want to thank you.
You're very welcome. And visiting the Bosnian pyramids is just an amazing experience. I would recommend, if anybody goes there, do Airbnb and stay with some local people rather than staying at this four-star hotel there, because Bosnia and Croatia, both, they're gorgeous countries and amazing, and you really ought to spend a few weeks traveling around them. But everybody smokes there. There are lots and lots of smokers, and the hotels just reek of cigarettes. So stay with the family in an Airbnb place.
Unless you're into the smoking, in which case stay at the hotel. Anyway, thank you again, Ken, and the website is freshandalive.com. Our website is thekembo.com. We've got all of our stuff on there, blog, Etsy store, YouTube channel, everything you could ever want. Ken, thank you so much, and go enjoy Holodeck 3, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks, you guys.
You got it. You've been listening to The Human Frequency. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.